Alright, let's paint a picture. You are progressing through Act 6, and one of the bosses ahead of you is the Mr. Sinister boss. For this boss, you want a poison immune champion that has access to a fury buff. And if you don't have that, then you are pretty much entirely roadblocked. This was always a problem for progressing accounts because that is such a niche counter, and you can't really use anyone besides your 5 or 6 star characters. So if you got unlucky and don't have a 5 or 6 star champion that has those requirements, you are fresh out of luck. Now, as of today, Kabam has removed the restrictions of 5 and 6 star champions in Act 6 and Act 7. So this is probably the biggest game-changing win imaginable for progressing players. Now, why is that? Well, like I said, sometimes the bosses in Act 6 are just so niche to where they require a very specific counter. And it's not just Mr. Sinister. Crossbones needs a poison immune champion or someone that can shrug off poison. Captain America needs a crit champion. Then you have the major annoyances like the, Medusa boss who requires a bleed character. Then there's the champion, there is the Hydra Adaptoid boss. There are a lot of different bosses in Act 6 that require a very, very niche counter. And with this change, you now have access to your full roster for these bosses. Now, am I saying that a 4-star rank 3 champion can take a boss in Act 6? Absolutely not. I'm not saying that in the slightest. I'm not saying that, bring your 3-star characters and solo the boss with them. I am not saying that. What I'm saying is, if you need a synergy to help get you through that quest, you now have access to that synergy. So let's paint a picture here yet again. Mr. Sinister boss. Like I said, you need a fury buff and a poison immune champion. That is really, really rare. But there is a synergy in the game that lets you get a permanent fury buff for any champion, and that is the Heimdall and Hela synergy. So now with these changes, you can get access to a 4-star Heimdall or even a 3-star Heimdall and Hela and just have that synergy ready and expand your options for that boss even further than before. So that is why this change is honestly massive for progressing accounts, because you now have access to 4-star and below synergies. For example, another one here, let's say you run Kingpin as a 5 or 6 star champion, but you don't have the Hood or Mr. Sinister or any champion that could get him that extra Purify or that Power Lock. Now you can just use a 4 or 3 star version of those champions and get that Power Lock and that Purify, and he will just blitz through Act 6, right? So that is why this is just really, really important, because synergies have always been a massive part in this game, especially for story content. And as someone who has an alt account that was just in Act 7 and Act 6, I wish they made this change sooner, obviously. I don't know why they waited so long for this change. I know there was massive backlash when this was first announced that Act 6 was 5 and 6 star gated. And for good reason, obviously, right? It prohibits synergies that are really important, and even some 4-star champions can take these bosses, but more on that later. But yeah, the synergies is one reason why this change is super good. But now let's talk about the second reason of why this change is really, really good, and that is 4-star ascended characters. Now, am I saying that 4-star ascension should be a priority for you? Absolutely not, right? 5-star champions are the way to go for tier 1 dust. However, if you are really, really desperate and you want a certain counter to a boss, let's say Mr. Sinister again, because he is one of the biggest roadblocks in the entire game. Now, let's say that you're back at 6.2.2 and you don't have a single poison immune champion. And you don't have Heimdall or Hela either. So what do? Well, let's say you have access to a 4-star Hulkling, which is not too hard to get, right? Because 4-star characters are handed out a ton when you start the game. Now, let's say you rank 5 him and ascend him. That is essentially a rank 4 5-star champion. And rank 4 5-star champions are absolutely huge for Act 6. My main roster for the Arya account was 5-star rank 3 characters for Act 6, or rank 4 characters even. It was pretty tiny, right? But 5-star rank 4 characters are still massive for that piece of content. They can be really, really good for just handling even boss fights, right? So yeah, this change is just really, really good. I think having access to 4-star characters is pretty massive, and it helps the synergies. It helps you just take bosses straight up that are really, really niche. So a pretty big win in my book. I think it's really cool, but let me know your thoughts on this change, and yeah, that's about it for me.